Hello and welcome to Dateline London. Nous sommes Charlie. We're all Charlie. The atrocity in France was an attack not just on a magazine, but on freedom of speech and on core values of open democracy worldwide. It raises profound issues about security, the integration or otherwise of Muslim minorities in Europe, and also, as we've heard from those connected with the security services, it raises questions about the powers they have and whether, as some claim, Edward Snowden's revelations about spying have actually damaged the capacity of intelligence agencies to prevent terrorism. My guests today are Agnès Poirier of France's Marianne, Nabila Ramdani, who's a French-Algerian writer and broadcaster, Michael Goldfarb of globalpost.com, and Alex Dean of Conservative Home. Very good to see you. Well, let's begin with the human. Hello and welcome to Dateline London. Nous sommes Charlie. We're all Charlie. The atrocity in France was an attack not just on a magazine, but on freedom of speech and on core values of open democracy worldwide. It raises profound issues about security, the integration or otherwise of Muslim minorities in Europe, and also, as we've heard from those connected with the security services, it raises questions about the powers they have and whether, as some claim, Edward Snowden's revelations about spying have actually damaged the capacity of intelligence agencies to prevent terrorism. My guests today are Agnès Poirier of France's Marianne, Nabila Ramdani, who's a French-Algerian writer and broadcaster, Michael Goldfarb of globalpost.com, and Alex Dean of Conservative Home. Very good to see you. Well, let's begin with the human cost of this, Agnès, because you were in Paris last week and you knew some of the people who were murdered. I take it the sense of shock just simply has not abated.
No, it took some hours to actually, because it went very fast, actually, in the sense that, you know, I was reading the review of Michel Houellebecq's latest novel, Soumission, which depicts France in 2022 and under Islamic law. And then I saw a picture on my screen, on my computer screen, and fellow journalist on the roof of Charlie Hebdo officers, and I thought, you know, taking shelter, and I thought, what's going on? The lift is, you know, not in order, there's a flooding. And then it went extremely fast, especially perhaps half an hour later, we knew that Hollande was on its way. And we thought, this is you know, quite dramatic. And then we got the pictures of armed men, but looking like policemen, with all in black balaclava and with war weapons, shooting at the police. And then the names, and then that was really dreadful when we got to know who had been killed, the cartoonists, France's most cherished talents. And we're talking about great artists, not only polemicists, people who make us laugh. And we think, you know, if you kill somebody who's drawing a cartoon, you know, what can we do? So this is when, you know, the stupor in France. And then, of course, the day after, there was another shootout, and then yesterday evening, another one. And the police, I must say, was quite, you know, extraordinary in the end. The capacity to actually hold two siege, making two raids at the same time in two different locations, and they were linked to each other because the hostage taker in Port de Vincennes said, if you do so, you know, we're related, we're linked.
Well, I'll kill people if
exactly.
You end the other siege.
So the situation was extremely fluid, and here we are, 17 people dead, you know.
How do you see it, and how do you how do you think the communities, the various Muslim communities in France see it? Do they see it any differently from the mainstream? Are they plugged in? Because this is something we want to explore today. To what extent people feel French?
Well, I think this came as a shock, an absolute shock to everybody in the first instance. Let's not forget that France has been remarkably free of such terrorist incidents. So to have the kind of spectacular, if I may put it that way, perpetrated at the heart of Paris was deeply disturbing. And it has to be said that the overwhelming majority of Muslims were very prompt indeed to show, the outrage and indeed to show support and solidarity for the victims, not least of all because the perpetrators of these atrocities are claiming or claim to do that in the name of a very decent and indeed peaceful religion. And we've seen how Muslim leaders and indeed imams have been very prompt to talk publicly to condemn these atrocities in very strong terms, but they have also warned against, seemingly inevitable backlash, which has already happened. We've seen attacks on mosques across France. Blank grenades were thrown at mosques. Bullet holes were found in the windows. Shots were fired. Explosions happened near mosques. Women wearing headscarves were abused. So this is the kind of consequences that we are bound to see.
Can I ask just a little bit about the perpetrators, the males anyway? They seem to be fringe figures in French society, however. 2 orphans in the case of the brothers, dead-end jobs. Are these the kind of people who would be easy prey? They may have in other cultures joined a gang or something, but are they easy prey for the radicals?
Well, they absolutely. They have a depressingly predictable background in the sense that there is an overlap between, people coming from very troubled suburban backgrounds. 2 of the gunmen brothers, orphaned children. One was homeless. As a Muslim in France, you experience day-to-day discrimination and indeed racism in every walk of life, from education to employment to housing and indeed to the expression of your religious belief. And when you mix that up with radicalization, and young people from that background are very easy prey for that, you have devastating effects. Just as you have an overlap, you had an overlap with Roman Catholicism and indeed the IRA. It doesn't mean that, the entire Catholic religion is indeed made up of extremists.
How do you see this, Alex? Because you wrote this week about the attack on freedom of speech, although it's fair to say that there's probably not very much that Charlie Hebdo stood for in terms of its editorial content that you would agree with.
No, they published a great number of things in a kind of anarchic, left-wing perspective, deeply disrespectful of all religions, things that I wouldn't care to publish or write myself, but I care deeply about their right to publish them. And so I agree with your premise in the outset of what you said, Gavin. This, to my view, was a profound attack on free speech, and I think that the media around the world, perhaps because media itself had been attacked, grasped that immediately, and that was the way that this story was written up, that this was a deliberately provocative journal on the edge of what is normally said in society, but it's at that age that we have to protect free speech, because if free speech is only about protecting popular speech, then it doesn't really exist in any true sense. You have to protect unpopular speech as well as popular speech. But there were 2 attacks here, not just on a group of journalists, and it's the second attack that worried me, because just as radical Islamists attacked that newspaper because they hated free speech, media got that straight away, radical Islamists attacked a Jewish supermarket because those radical Islamists hate Jews. It was an anti-Semitic attack. And that wasn't said in the broadcasts yesterday. Today's newspapers did pick that up, and that's been much more prevalent. But I think in a lot of the coverage immediately, people weren't talking about the fact this was a kosher supermarket with Jewish victims, and that concerned me.
I mean, to a degree, things were moving fast, as Anya said.
Sure.
And to his enormous credit, President Hollande, in his very brief remarks yesterday when he confirmed that there had been deaths in the supermarket, said clearly that it was anti-Semitic. And this is like, this would make it the second attack in 3 years on a Jewish target. I appreciate what you're saying, Alex, about the anti-Semitic nature of this attack. But if we pull it back a little bit, just to take up Nabila's point and Gavin's question to Nabila, there's 2 things. In talking about this, I don't think we can make excuses.
No, absolutely not.
For what these guys did. Because there are hundreds of thousands of impoverished people all over the world, and they don't walk into into satirical magazines and blow people away, or into Jewish supermarkets and blow people away. So I would like to say this. attacks on free speech happen every day in the Arab world and in Pakistan. It is part of this terrible civil war that's going on within the Muslim Ummah, has been going on for 40 years.
And can I just say they also happen from governments? I mean, we have seen, for instance, a Saudi blogger who's being flogged.
Who's being whipped.
Because
50 lashes a week until he gets to 1,000.
It's not just terrorist groups and fringe groups, it is governments in some Arab countries.
And you know, one of the things that's come out of this event is that I have never seen such a rapid reaction from Muslims against what's being done in their name. All over my social networks, from some BBC presenters down to, you know, school teachers in Karachi, that, you know, in this new age, you get to be friendly with a guy in Karachi who've never been to Karachi. Want it to stop. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing, just to take up the point about this, I want to detach these people from Islam, because I don't think that they do represent, you know, 1.5 billion people are not represented by these misguided guys. And I don't even, and misguided is too polite. There was an incredible film made 20 years ago in France called La Haine, Hatred. And if you even look at the production stills, they almost look like the guys who did this yesterday, except there's no Islam. It's just, you know, they're people from the banlieue, they have no hope, and they go off on some wild killing spree. Hatred. This is about raw hatred
you're not
of people.
You're not suggesting it has nothing to do with Islam, are you?
No, not at all. I'm just saying I want to detach. I'm making 2 points here. One is I'm saying, look, there's a social pathology with these guys. They were motivated by hatred. Then there's this other thing that's going on within Islam, coming to grips with modernity, and there's a civil war going on.
Yes. I mean, what I was offering was not some sort of liberal excuse for what's happened. What's happened, you know, is devastating. It's an evil massacre. There are no ifs and buts. But as we know, people, impressionable, vulnerable members of society are far, you know, are found themselves to be the prey of, you know, radical preachers.
That's what I wanted to get onto, because surely part of this problem is those radical preachers and what most of us would regard as hate speech. Now, those are the people, and they tend to be middle-aged men, who do not find themselves very often in the police net, but they inspire these people to do this. Is that not really the core of this problem?
Well, first of all, let's just, you know, remember that Christians, Jews, Muslims, and indeed atheists died in those attacks. So, you know, the targets were multiple, if you like. But I think what we get this discussion wrong is I don't think it was an attack about free speech. You know, we are talking about Al-Qaeda-linked criminals killing people on the streets of central Paris. That's why the whole debate got distorted. Unfortunately, Al-Qaeda has become a byword for Islam. But the idea that Al-Qaeda is interested in freedom of speech, and Charlie Hebdo in particular, is preposterous. Al-Qaeda has a record
they were interested in attacking what they thought was blasphemy.
Exactly.
And that's
let me clarify
this is a title that was blasphemy against all faiths.
This goes
Al-Qaeda is interested.
The Danish cartoonist.
Let me clarify that.
You know, come on.
Al-Qaeda is interested in executing what they perceive as enemies of Islam, and that include Judeo-Christianism. That's what Al-Qaeda, and that's exactly what's happened. They went after soft target, who they believed, you know, represented, you know, an insult to their religion, and indeed, you know, went out to to get them.
I just want to pursue this question about what the implications might be in terms of policy and politics within France itself. And this whole question, I mean, we had in Britain too, and perhaps you could say in Germany, where there are anti-Islamic demonstrations, Pegida and so on. We had a British politician saying, Nigel Farage, multiculturalism, that's part of the problem. France has got a very different attitude to the secular state, the republic and Republican ideals. Where do you think that helps people fit into French society now, by saying, these are certain rules that we live by, you should accept them, including not wearing burqas, for example?
Well, I have to say it used to be the French Republic's values. I think we were quite complacent, 25 years ago. We started giving, you know, making concessions for X or Y group. We undermined the Republican values, which so far had worked so well at creating, you know, cohesion. You know, we weren't talking about, we were all French citizens, you know. Doesn't matter whether we were Jewish, atheist from Brittany, we didn't even know. Now we know it's terrible. Now we know there are French plus X or Y, and this is I don't want to
What
know
sort of
that.
hyphenated French people? Is
Well,
there
exactly.
hyphenated
I mean,
Americans of different
So yesterday,
backgrounds?
yes, of course, it was an anti-Semitic act, and President Hollande said it immediately. On the other hand, if you look at the 17 casualties and victims and representing the rich diversity of France, it's also, for me, it's an attack on democracy. It's an attack on a certain idea of France, and that it means, so it's democracy and barbarians, really. And so, you know, I don't want to make distinctions. And tomorrow, when I go back and march with millions of people in the streets of Paris and France, it's, you know, it's about democracy and nothing else.
Gavin, that discussion, whilst this has happened in France this week, that discussion about the nature of society is one happening in all Western countries.
Yes.
Pim Fortuyn, before his murder, talked to your point about the difference between multiculturalism, which he decried, you've got to be part of our society, and multiracialism, to which he was open and acceptable to, and really accepted. And that was the distinction that he chose to make in the manner that you were describing Farage's position. But before we move too far away from that, the point you were discussing with Nabila about the nature of these individuals, there is, it seems to me, a worrying development that this week represents. These young men, first of all, once they'd carried out their attacks, didn't seek to turn their guns on themselves and didn't wait until the authorities came to have a shootout to kill them. They sought, and successfully sought, to escape, presumably in order to carry out another attack. This is deeply worrying, because if you are in the business of conducting this sort of atrocity, that is the sort of soldier that you want. You want somebody who realises he is an asset in this appalling trade of death, and he's much better off coming away in order to conduct it again.
Well,
that's new.
this may move us further along than you want, but I mean, all reports indicate that the older of the Gouachi brothers went to Yemen and trained with Anwar al-Awlaki, who was an American citizen who went over to al-Qaeda and was ultimately executed from the sky by a drone, by presidential order. Clearly, what goes on in these training camps, and we laugh about them, partially because we don't get to see much of them. There's very, very few journalists left in Yemen. And they do obviously get very good commando training.
I don't know if
you saw that, I mean,
clearly effective, aren't they?
Well, and so when Nabila, I do have to disagree on this. That you know, they're young men, but they have access to training, and they aren't, by middle-aged men, being indoctrinated anymore. If you look at the
I'm
imam
not
of the
disagreeing
mosque,
with you.
that these guys
because
attended
we've
was
gone
quite
beyond
young.
that for some of the people. I mean, there is a radicalisation problem, but for hundreds of young men, it's already happened. So in terms of the security, that's what I want to come on to, actually, was, and you touched on it, the whole question of security. I mean, we've heard the head of MI5 this week basically saying, of course it could happen here, it probably will happen here, or something similar. We've had a number of people. I talked to Dame Pauline Neville-Jones, formerly head of JIC, one of the part of the security apparatus here, saying, you know, Edward Snowden, his revelations have not been helpful in the fight against terrorism. I mean, where do you... Because those of us who believe in freedom of speech said, you know, Edward Snowden, let's see it. It may be counterproductive. It may be absolutely antithetical to our security.
In the specific case, the brothers were known. They were on a no-fly list to the United States. They were known to British security, and they were doubtless known to the Sûreté in France. It was just, you know, it's the old thing, you know, they only have to be lucky once.
We have to be lucky every time.
And so, but leaving that aside, I mean, this brings us to a very critical point, which is, we do know who's going. I mean, we know who's been going to Syria, and we know who's coming back from Syria. And, you know, you don't want to sell your birthright for a mess of pottage in this situation. It's been terrible. But if you look at the ways civil liberties have been racked back in the United States and here in the United Kingdom on the back of 9/11, I don't think it's a good idea, you know?
I agree.
And that's
And you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that you consider the threat that we faced from the IRA, a comparison that Nabila was making, objectively far more dangerous to the people in these islands. We let down our own civil liberties far less than we did under the last government. A 28-day detention without trial when they originally sought 90. Attempt to introduce ID cards, random stop and search, control orders, house arrest in perpetuity. These are extraordinary abrogations of civil liberties. And the next one, which of course comes once again because of this, is attempts by the state to monitor all your phone calls, emails, record your whereabouts when those communications are made. That is to say, Despite the fact that intelligence is available about specified individuals, which can be signed off by a judge or even by a minister, that's good surveillance. What the state wants to have, using attacks like this as a pretext, is surveillance of all of us, all of the time, in all of what we do, just in case. And that cannot be right.
Well, and I think that's why politically for President Hollande, this is going to put him in an incredibly difficult position. Remember that one of his very few successes while in office is, he's built this reputation as somebody who has zero tolerance towards Islamic fundamentalism. He intervened in Mali to try and stop the spread of radical Islam. And for such an outrage to strike at the heart of a Western society is incredibly damaging. So we will have to address. People are scared in France. They are scared of being shot at again. And more crucially, we're talking about liberties, civil liberties. France will have to address that fundamental paradox that Charlie Hebdo encapsulates. It cannot claim to have this absolute right to have absolute freedom of speech, while at the same time building a reputation, and a very, very nasty one in their own terms, they call themselves the Nasty Magazine, in crusading, pursuing a crusade to curb the liberties and freedoms of Muslims. They want to repress the freedom in the way they dress, the way they eat, the way they practice their own faith. You can't have that fundamental paradox.
Where do you stand on that?
So, I have to disagree extremely strongly. You said yesterday, we were on radio together, and you said that they were racist.
I very much believe that,
I
absolutely.
have to say, well, this is a lie, and you're defaming their memory. The thing is, they can't defend themselves, they are dead. So, there was not a racist bone in any of them. They were humanists, and humanists are not racist. And I mean, we have to say that very clearly. And a cartoon is a cartoon. A cartoon is not a bullet. A mass murderer is a mass murderer, is not a victim. That's all I have to say on this.
Gavin, I will have to address that if you give me a minute or so. You can't, print hateful, vindictive cartoons and think they will have no consequence. In September 2012...
It's remarkable.
Of course they have a consequence.
In September
you go down, you can hold a placard outside and say you're racist, but you don't take a gun, ever.
No,
come on,
don't make me say what
please.
I haven't said and what I will never say. This kind of violence has no justification whatsoever.
But you do seek to blame the victim.
No, what will be, in fact, insulting to the memory of those who died. I've heard that President Hollande is going to give 1 million euros to the Charlie Hebdo. Now, if that money goes towards freedom of speech and indeed towards a magazine that has suffered so much this week, I'm all for it. If it goes in favour of publishing the kind of hateful, vindictive and prejudiced cartoons, that will be a massive insult to their memory.
That is part of freedom of speech. Freedom of speech
isn't. It comes with responsibility.
Freedom of speech does not exist unless it protects the views of those you despise. And the point about your position is that you like freedom of speech up until people say things you don't like, and then you want it to stop.
I believe in freedom of speech. Why is it not conceivable to have freedom of speech and have joke and satire and draw the line
because you're making
when
the
you
difference.
have prejudice, the expression of prejudice and the expression of hate?
You are seeking to push together two different notions. The first, which you and I share, is that one shouldn't be rude. You are seeking to police manners or good behaviour or politeness. Wait. And the second thing you want to do is then use the state, which protects criminality or protects against criminality, to enforce your view of what is acceptable in manners.
I have to say, I'm not a dictator. It's not about my view.
And who decides in the end?
It's the rule of law. There are legislation that legislate against the expression of racial hatred, against bigotry.
But then they didn't break the rule of law then, otherwise they would have been closed down.
You're talking about a society, Gavin, let me make that point very clearly, where politicians in France come out publicly making routine, constant, and they're being found guilty in courts of law for making discriminatory comments,
but
racism.
Our point was about Charlie Hebdo, and Charlie Hebdo clearly didn't break the law, otherwise it would have been closed down.
I just want to make the point that Alex is right on this one. As a and by the way, I was no fan of Charlie Hebdo. Some of their caricatures of Jews were, if you put them in a different context, like Der Stürmer in 1927,
was sad.
That's the intention. Clearly, the intention was always to be provocative. And that's exactly what
and rude.
And frankly,
Not always, sometimes.
I think that any society, especially one that is multiracial or multicultural, you choose your term, needs to be able to let off steam in this way.
Michael, so for example, I, as a Christian, disliked the Hebdo cartoon of Christ being buggered by God, being buggered by the Holy Ghost. But I noticed it wasn't Christians that stormed Charlie Hebdo.
OK, we've just got a couple of minutes left. There was one area I just wanted to pick up, and it was raised by Nabila, which is the question of the backlash. I mean...
Well, we're not there yet, are we? I mean, unity. No, we're not.
Come on,
and you're talking about...
So you're denying the fact that mosques have been...
I think there is one group of people, as David Aronovich wrote today, there is one group of people in France right now who fear for their safety as a community, and it's not Muslims, it's Jews. That's the first place...
Let's get that straight. Let's get that straight. Are you denying the fact that there have been attacks on mosques?
Let me say
hold on.
France is not on fire. The mosques in France are not on fire. They've been, of course, there's backlash. I mean, but...
However, the main synagogue in Paris was
well,
closed yesterday on
exactly,
Shabbat.
constantly.
But it goes without saying that there will be backlash.
Of many kinds, and against the
and not
far
only
right,
that,
I hope.
now in France, you don't have to bomb a mosque. You can vote for the National Front, which a lot of people are doing.
And that's why, Gavin, it's so important to stress at this critical time that François Hollande will have a very important task to guarantee the security of all his citizens. It's the number one duty of any government.
Council of the Interior Minister made it very clear that
that's his intention is.
But he took he took a very peculiar line yesterday. He took the one that people want to hear, which was that we can protect you, they just slipped through the net. And the honest adult answer may be, we can't protect you. As long as we're going to be a free society, we can't protect you from all things.
At all the time.
And we mustn't let terrorism change our way of life and undermine the same freedoms that they were attacking in the first place. That means they win.
We're going to have to leave it there. I'm afraid I'm going to curtail freedom of speech. Thank you all very much. That's it for Dateline London for this week. We're back next week at the same time. And if you've any thoughts or comments on anything we've discussed, you can contact us on Twitter at Gavin Esler. Thanks for watching and goodbye.
However, don't take an AK and...